I was sitting at Philadelphia Airport, feeling restless and knowing this wasn't how I'd planned to spend my evening. I sat there watching the boarding process, hoping my name would pop up for my flight home to Richmond. I'd been in the city for a few days now, here with my sisters to negotiate the sale of our family's pharmaceutical company, a small, reliable business. Dad had founded the company years ago. It made special pills that were rarely used but still highly valuable. It kept us comfortably busy, but it never exactly grew. With both Mom and Dad gone, it had fallen to me and my sisters to take care of things. Over the past few days, my lawyers and I had put in all we had to get this deal moving. Now it was all finalized, or at least as much as it could be. The heavy paperwork was in the hands of the lawyers. I was ready to leave the city behind and get back to my life, hoping I could make it home tonight. Unfortunately, the last flight to Richmond was already fully booked. As luck would have it, I was third in line on the standby list. I didn't even call Jennifer because I wasn't sure what to say. Instead, I wandered over to the airport bar, ordered myself a gin and tonic, and kept a wary eye on the gate. I was really hoping for a miracle. I thought about the deal, and how it would affect us, my sisters and I. We'd each get a good share, over $10 million, and we'd have a transition period. That meant Jennifer and I would be in a different league. Our twin daughters were in their junior year at UNCC, and they'd always been a financial burden, with a constant flow of tuition bills. But this deal was about to turn that around for good. We'd been steady, but this kind of money was something else. As I took another sip, I glanced at the gate again, and my heart jumped a little as I noticed a change on the board. My name inched up the list, and I quickly paid my bill, tossed a generous tip down, and made a beeline for the gate. There the agent handed me a boarding pass, hurriedly explaining that the group who checked in and I hadn't seen any of the others, so I was one of 3 people on standby. I walked down the jet bridge, feeling my luck change with each step. I was in a first-class seat. Maybe it's a good sign. I settled in with a grin. I'm on my way home and in first class. I took it as a sign that the deal might actually go off smoothly in the end. I ordered another gin and tonic, let the weariness take over, and soon drifted off, dreaming of what this new chapter might bring for me and Jennifer. The landing jolted me awake, a harsh reminder of the long day behind me. I stumbled my way to the taxi stand, squinting against the bright lights, not really wanting to wake Jennifer at this hour. I'd driven my truck to the airport a few days back, but tonight, exhausted and more than a little tipsy, I was glad enough to leave the driving to someone else. I was a little tipsy, so I was glad to leave the driving to someone else. I dozed off in the cab, letting the night blur around me. The driver finally had to give me a nudge when we arrived. I paid him generously, stepped out into the familiar night air, and felt an unexpected chill run down my spine. I noticed something I hadn't anticipated: a gold Mercedes parked in front of my side of the garage. It was sleek, polished, and eye-catching. I was so surprised I couldn't move. I'd never seen this car before, and it seemed completely out of place. Our house was dark, and I stood there on the driveway for a few minutes, trying to make sense of it. I'd spoken with Jennifer earlier, back when I was in my lawyer's office. She hadn't mentioned any visitors, and here I was, standing in the cool night. My head was spinning with questions. I finally forced myself to move, slipping quietly through the side path and into the house. I moved deliberately through the darkened kitchen, then up the stairs. My mind was racing ahead with a mixture of dread and hope. I'd convinced myself that everything was fine and that maybe I'd come home to find her asleep, peaceful as ever. But as I reached our bedroom door and noticed it was slightly ajar, I felt a sudden sense of unease. Something inside me gave way. I pushed the door open and took a step inside. What I saw stopped me in my tracks. Jennifer was lying there, deeply asleep, one bare arm wrapped around a man who lay beside her. He looked equally comfortable, a faint smile softening his face as they slept, breathing in slowly. I felt like time had slowed down, everything around me going silent as my heart pounded in my chest. I could hardly make sense of it. The hand on his chest looked familiar but also strange. I stood there for a long time, my mind slowly returning to normal. Details came into focus, and I noticed the man's clothes on the chair I'd always sat in. I felt angry, like a fire was building inside me. For a moment, I wanted to grab something and confront them both. But I had a sense of self-preservation. My brain kicked in and I let the moment pass. I pulled out my phone and took a few photos, documenting this scene that I couldn't quite believe was real. Once I had the photos, I found myself thinking that the man was taller and broader, likely stronger. Taking him on wasn't worth it. Instead, I gathered up his clothes and shoes in silence, with one last look at Jennifer, my wife and the mother of my daughters. I turned away, holding back the tide of emotions threatening to overwhelm me. I left the room and I went downstairs and out into the night. In the driveway, I pressed the key fob and the Mercedes's lights blinked as the doors unlocked. I put my bags in the back seat, took a deep breath and got into the driver's seat, marveling at the smooth leather beneath me. The car was something else, powerful and quiet as I drove away. I took the man's wallet from his jacket pocket and looked at its contents under the street light. His driver's license told me what I needed to know. James Lee, senior sales manager at a I went to the End car dealership in Richmond. If James had a family of his own, I realized this situation could unravel his life, causing more pain than he'd bargained for. It wouldn't just affect him, but Jennifer too. For now, though I was utterly drained, I knew I needed some rest. I checked into a nearby motel and let the exhaustion pull me into a deep sleep. Meanwhile, Jennifer, ever cautious, lay in bed with James the next morning, oblivious to what had happened. In my mind, I was still back in Philadelphia. She thought she'd managed to keep this affair and her secret life under wraps. She was convinced that I'd remain unaware. It had been almost 5 months since this affair started with her, and she'd managed to keep things quiet. Here she was now, reflecting on James. She was considering the toll this was taking on her, as she lay there. She mused that James satisfied her physically, though maybe not as thoroughly as I had. He was too smooth. Way too much like the salesman he was. And now his growing possessiveness was starting to bother her. Last night he didn't insist on staying over. He pushed boundaries she hadn't wanted crossed. It felt disrespectful, and she knew it was the final straw. Despite her certainty that I was in Philadelphia, she felt a sense of guilt. She realized the weight of another man lying in our bed. She decided she'd end it today. In fact, she planned to call James later to break things off gently, but she got up and went to the shower, dressed as she was. James came out of the bathroom in a towel, looking a bit confused. He asked her where her clothes were. She looked around and said, "I didn't move anything." "Are you leaving?" he said. "I don't know. I thought I saw them folded on the chair, but they're gone," she said. "No, I didn't put them in the guest room or something," I replied, looking a little confused that I hadn't touched them. James's brow furrowed and he hurried down the hall, coming back a moment later to say that they weren't in the guest room either. Jennifer, trying to hide her irritation, suggested that maybe I'd left them downstairs after we came in last night. I was pretty sure I hadn't, but I checked anyway. James shook his head and headed downstairs to check, returning a minute later with a worried look on his face. He said that my car was gone too. I parked it right out front, and now it's nowhere in sight. Someone was here last night. They took my clothes and they stole my car. Jennifer whispered, her face pale as the implications sank in. How could this have happened? She was struggling to believe it. Someone had broken into the house in the middle of the night. She sank onto the bed, struggling to steady herself. James moved closer, his hand on her shoulder. He asked what was wrong. She took a deep breath and managed to speak, though her voice was faint. "James, what if it was Cole? What if he came back early from Philadelphia and took your things in your car?" The color drained from James's face as he sank beside her, shaking his head. "We need to find out where he is. If he's still in Philadelphia, then this must have been a break-in. If not," Jennifer nodded, attempting to regain her composure. "I'll call his office. His secretary's usually in early, so she should know where he is." She quickly dialed my office, willing after a few rings. My secretary Ruth answered. Hi Ruth, it's Jennifer. I know it's early, but I was wondering if you've heard from Cole. He didn't call last night, and I just wanted to check in. Any word from him? I spoke to him yesterday evening before I left, and he said they were making progress on the deal, and it might wrap up soon, which is good to know. Jennifer replied, her voice softening with relief. Call you, yes please, she replied. If he has a moment. I know he's busy though. I understand. Take care, Jennifer. The line went silent. Jennifer turned to James, her expression visibly more relaxed. Cole's still in Philadelphia, she confirmed. We can call emergency services, report a break-in and explain the car theft. He ran a hand through his hair and muttered under his breath. What do we even tell them, Jennifer? That your friend had his clothes stolen from your bedroom and his car taken from the driveway. She grimaced, feeling a new wave of panic. We'll need to think carefully. Maybe you could go home first and report the if you claim it happened there. It's less suspicious and you can avoid mentioning the clothes. James thought about this for a moment and then said, I could do that. Yesterday, I told my wife I'd be in Atlanta for a meeting about the new Mercedes model and wouldn't be home until noon. She'd know something was up if I returned earlier. Jennifer pursed her lips and then said she'd wait until noon. She said she'd left her keys in the car for a quick stop on the way to the dealership and that it was gone when she came out. She mentioned that her wallet was in the car, which would add credibility. James leaned back, seeming relieved that it could actually work. He said they had some time and that maybe they could make it work. He said it with a playful smile, but Jennifer wasn't smiling back. A shadow passed over her face as she looked at him, her tone growing serious. James, I think it's time to end this. James said, I think we should call it a day. Cole and I aren't willing to take that chance again. Have you thought about what might have happened if we'd stayed? James didn't argue, though he looked slightly hurt. After a moment, he nodded and got dressed in a spare set of clothes. Jennifer found a set in her guest room. They left together, the morning's tension still thick in the air. Left to find breakfast and figure out their next steps, James glanced at Jennifer, considering the possibility of arguing. After a moment, though, he realized she was right. They'd been lucky so far, but it wasn't wise to test their luck any further. You're right, he muttered, giving a small smile as he recalled another attractive middle-aged woman. The woman who often came to the car dealership. I agree it's been good. Getting James into something he could wear was more difficult than Jennifer had thought. He was at least 50 pounds heavier and stood a solid 4 inches taller than me, so finding anything suitable in our home was like searching for a needle. Eventually, she found an old pair of sweatpants that were a bit worn out. They were pretty tight around his waist, so she made some makeshift ties to hold them up with a shirt. She also found a faded sweatshirt that was once white but now had a pink tinge after a careless wash. She trimmed the sleeves and widened the armholes, and it just barely worked. She laughed at the clownish effect but bit her tongue, offering only a faint smile as James put on the makeshift outfit. They decided to pass the time by watching TV, waiting until it was late enough to head over to James's house. Around the same time that James was realizing his clothes and car were missing, I was arriving at the address listed on his driving license. His house, a modest but pleasant place, had a small bicycle leaning against the garage wall, indicating there were kids around. I parked a few houses away and sat in the car, still processing everything. My night at the motel had gone by fast. I barely slept, instead lying awake and trying to piece together what had happened, and what I finally got up and went for a run, hoping it might clear my mind. I didn't feel any worse than I had last night. Maybe I was still in shock. Now standing on James's front step with his wallet in my hand, I stared at the driver's license and rang the doorbell. It wasn't long before a young woman, probably in her 20s, answered. The door opened and she looked attractive but a little disheveled, like she'd been up with kids or hadn't had time for herself. I wasn't sure what to expect as I held up James's driver's license and gestured towards the gold Mercedes parked down the street. Before I could even explain why I was there, she slammed the door shut. After a few moments, the door opened. Once more, she held her phone in one hand, her thumb hovering over the emergency button. I was ready to call the police, but she told me to just tell her if my husband was okay. I replied calmly, saying that I had a photo on my phone of her husband and my wife in bed the night before. The photo showed them both undressed and sound asleep. There was nothing wrong with her husband or mine. If you want to call the police, go ahead. I'll be in the car waiting. She stared at me, her expression changing from fear to a kind of weary understanding. Finally, her gaze softened, and she lowered the phone. She was about to say something when a small voice from inside the house called Mummy. She gave me a quick nod and said, "Wait here. I'll be right back." She turned and walked into the house. I followed her towards what I assumed was the kitchen, and heard her talking in hushed tones to at least one child. A few minutes later, she returned with a cup of coffee and offered it to me. "Hope you take it black," she said, almost apologetically. "I need to get the kids ready for school and drop them off. Honestly, I think I trust you more than my husband right now. Wait here. I'll be back and we can talk." "Sure, I can do that." I sipped my coffee, letting the silence sink in. I thought about calling my office, but decided against it. I chose to stay in that strange, quiet living room until she returned. When she came back, she looked different, more put together. She must have taken a moment upstairs because her hair was brushed and there was a hint of lipstick. She extended her hand to me and said, "Sorry for the chaos earlier. I'm Karen Lee, currently married to James Lee, who it seems has been involved with your wife." I couldn't help but laugh at her phrasing, feeling a brief moment of shared relief. "You've summed it up perfectly. I'm Cole Johnson, and my wife's name is Jennifer Johnson. Let me explain what happened last night as I recounted the events." Karen's face fell. Her expression turned grim as she dabbed at her eyes, trying to maintain composure. "I'm filing for divorce," I said finally. "These photos will certainly help with the settlement if you think you might need them. I can send them to your phone." She paused, looking conflicted. Then she shook her head no. "Keep them," she said. "I don't want those. Images burned into my memory forever, but if I ever need them, I'll call you." "Of course," I agreed, "and here's my lawyer's contact information if you need anything. I probably won't be staying at my job or home much longer." "Thank you," she replied. Her tone was sincere. "But what should we do now? Are you planning to return the car or wait for James to confront you?" "Oh, I don't know. I'm kind of fond of the car," I said with a small smile. "I've never driven a Mercedes before, so I think I'll keep it until someone insists I give it back. As for James, maybe we'll just call him an idiot for now." Karen chuckled, and I joined in the shared laugh, breaking some of the tension. "Actually," she added, "the cars are registered in my name for tax reasons. There's something about depreciation. James, please put it under my name since I'm the one driving it most of the time. If you get pulled over, just have the police call me to verify. I'll tell them you have permission." I nodded, appreciating her plan, but waiting to see if she'd add more. "One more thing," she continued. "We've had a lot of break-ins recently. I've been keeping an eye on the insurance around here lately. You've got James's keys and clothes. If the spare key we keep hidden out back is missing, he might try to get in. And if our security systems are set to instant alert, well, he'll draw some attention from the police." "Karen," I said, giving her a genuine smile, "I think I'm falling for you. You're amazing." "Thanks, but let's stay calm. Here's what I'll do. I'll pick up the kids and take them to the park after school. That'll give him time to come home and make a mess. Whatever happens, keep me updated and call me when you're ready to return the car. I don't want you to get into trouble over this. We're all set." With that, she handed me a note giving me permission to drive the car. She planned to retrieve the hidden key, set the alarm, and be out of there for the rest of the day. Meanwhile, Jennifer and James were on their way to his house. She dropped him off, not slowing down much, and he headed up the drive, feeling a mix of dread and hope. He wondered if Karen might have left the door unlocked, but as he tried the handle, he found it locked tight. He went around to the back, hunting for the spare key under the rock by the back door. His face fell as he found it missing. "Oh crap!" he muttered, glancing around. He'd have to break in after trying the back door and finding it locked. He grabbed a branch from a nearby tree, planning to smash the family room window. He then positioned 2 chairs from the patio beneath the window to avoid stepping on broken glass. He hurled the branch, shattering the glass and setting off the alarm. He climbed over the chairs, trying to silence the alarm, but was too slow. Fortunately, a passing police car had been alerted earlier by Karen about potential break. Police, step away from the house with your hands up. James glanced over and saw 2 officers with their guns drawn. He stumbled back from the window, his hands raised. I can explain, he tried to say, but one officer quickly cuffed him, ignoring his protest. They read him his rights, and he stammered, "This is my house. I lost my car and clothes, so I needed to get inside." One of the officers raised an eyebrow at James's makeshift tracksuit. James's makeshift tracksuit prompted a raised eyebrow. "You've lost your car too, sir? Have you reported it missing?" James hesitated, unsure what to reveal. He didn't want to give away where he'd been or why he hadn't filed a report, but jail wasn't appealing either. Thinking quickly, he offered, "Call my wife. She'll confirm it's my house. I'm just having a bit of a rough day." One of the officers dialed Karen's number. James could hear only parts of the conversation. Conversation: "This is Officer Reed with Richmond PD. We're at the address and we have a man claiming to be your husband who tried to break into your house." Turning back, the officer said, "The lady says her husband is in Atlanta. She hopes we throw you in jail and toss the key." James's face fell as he was led to the patrol car. The office was worried as she tried calling my phone, but there was no response. She then called my office. "Ruth, it's Jennifer again. I'm starting to get a little worried about Colt. Have you heard from him?" "There haven't been any updates yet," Ruth replied, "but if you're concerned, I'll check and get back to you." "Thanks, Ruth. I really appreciate it. Last night, he asked me to let you know he'd call later." "Thanks, Ruth," Jennifer said, feeling a cayenne form in her stomach. Meanwhile, I drove Karen's Mercedes to meet with a divorce lawyer recommended by my own business lawyer. I took a seat in the waiting room where the receptionist greeted me with a calm smile. "Mr. Johnson, Miss Cox will be with you shortly." I waited. As I took in the quiet professionalism of the office, a woman with red hair entered the room. "Mr. Johnson," she said, extending her hand. "I'm Polly Cox," she continued. "Fred spoke highly of you." She extended her hand with a professional smile. "Let's move to my office and go over your situation," she suggested. I followed her into her office, where she gestured for me to sit. Her secretary offered me coffee, which I accepted gratefully. I took a sip. As I sat down, I got down to business. I told her about Jennifer's infidelity, my plans to divorce, and how to protect my assets, especially the proceeds from the recent sale of my family's company. I decided to leave out the incident with the Mercedes for now. I wasn't sure how Ply would take it as I started recounting the story. Ply listened intently. From time to time, she made a note when I paused. She looked up at Cole and said, "May I call you that?" I nodded, and she continued, "Here's some relatively good news, given the circumstances. Fred mentioned that you owned your shares in the company before your marriage, which makes them separate property. Your wife has no claim on them or the proceeds from the sale. Why did you keep those assets separate from any joint accounts?" "I think so," I replied, nodding. Polly leaned forward and rested her elbows on her desk. "When it comes to the house and retirement accounts, it's not as favorable, given your higher income. You should expect to provide alimony for several years. However, we may be able to adjust contributions towards her retirement by modifying the alimony. It's not ideal, but it could help avoid potential issues down the line, especially with..." I nodded, seeing how complicated this would get. "Our kids are in college now, so there's no child support involved." I added, "Right," Polly replied, "but you'll still want to cover their college expenses, is that okay?" "Yes, that works." Based on the current appraised value, I sighed, thinking back to everything that had happened in that house after what I witnessed last night. "I don't think I want to keep it," I said. I doubt Jennifer could afford to buy me out, so selling it seems like the best option. All right, Polly said, making a note. I'll prepare the necessary paperwork. The divorce petition is fairly standard, so I can have it ready by tomorrow morning. If you'd like, we could serve her tomorrow afternoon and propose a settlement by next week. Wow, things are moving pretty fast. I felt a pang in my chest, my mind reeling from how rapidly everything was happening. Just yesterday, I'd been on top of the world, excited to share the news about the company sale with Jennifer. Now I was here working out the logistics of divorce. Polly leaned forward, studying my face. Listen, Cole, she said gently, if there's any chance of reconciliation, maybe take a moment to think. I shook my head. The hurt was too raw to ignore. No, it's just a shock, that's all, I replied. Less than 24 hours ago, I was eager to share big news with my wife. Now I'm here filing for divorce, but we have to move forward. I'll figure out the rest, she nodded, understanding. If you change your mind, just give me a call. Her tone was soft as she thanked me, settled the initial fees, and left the office. As I walked back to the gold Mercedes, I couldn't help but replay the events of last night in my head. I saw Jennifer with another man in our bed, a sight I knew I'd never forget. I remembered that I'd promised my secretary I'd call Jennifer. I pulled out my phone and dialed. She answered, her voice calm but slightly anxious. Jennifer, it's Cole. I said, just returning your call. Oh, Cole, thank you for calling, she replied, her voice softening. I miss you. Where are you? I said. I'm here in Richmond. There was silence on the other end for a moment before she spoke again. Her voice was tight with apprehension. Cole, when did you get back last night? I got back last night, I said, letting the weight of the words sink in. Her breathing hitched. I could tell she was struggling to keep her cool. Cole, I think I should hang up. Jennifer, I said quickly. Can we meet somewhere? I need to see you just for a few minutes. This woman had been my love, the mother of my daughters, my partner for over 2 decades. Despite everything, part of me still longed to understand and face her one last time. She hesitated, but finally she agreed. All right, Cole. How about Center Cafe at 6? My chest tightened at the mention of the cafe. It was a place loaded with memories from when we'd first met. Back then, it had been our spot. A place where laughter and love once felt boundless. Now, all I felt was a sharp pain of dread. I'll be there, I replied, then paused, letting my words carry the weight of our past. Jennifer, please understand. I'm sorry, she said. Her voice cracked. It was 6 o'clock, and Jennifer was already at the cafe, drinking a glass of wine as she waited. Her eyes were puffy, and it looked like she'd been crying. I watched her from a distance, thinking about her early days. She'd been outgoing and charming, a woman who filled up every room she entered. But now, all I could see was the strain etched on her face. Jennifer had always talked about her past, mentioning the guys she dated in college. They were mostly athletes, and she said they made her feel simultaneously strong and vulnerable. She told me that being with them sometimes felt like losing control, and that she'd buried that experience until I came into her life. I thought I was providing her with stability. She had what she wanted. I gave her the security and love she said she wanted, and for years it seemed enough. But now I wonder. She told me about a red-eye flight she took once years ago after we'd spent a weekend on the West Coast for a business trip. She'd flown back by herself while I stayed for a few more meetings. She mentioned sitting beside a burly man. I heard she'd had a coach who'd been a bit too friendly. Apparently, his hand had slid up her leg when she dozed off. She hadn't pushed him away. In fact, she told me she'd felt something. It was a strange confession, but it hinted at a need for excitement she didn't find with me. From there, her behavior had shifted. She'd had brief flings like the one with that NFL player. The player was able to compartmentalize, or so it seemed. Yet when our daughters went off to college, I thought we'd turn a corner. I even bought her a luxury car, thinking it would symbolize the new chapter we were stepping into. However, that decision was the turning point. She went to the Mercedes dealership and met James Lee. He didn't just sell her the car, he sold her a fantasy. She ended up in our lives and in our bed. I thought that was the one place that was off limits, but she led him into our lives. The past day had aged me. I could feel it. "Hello, Jennifer," I said, taking the seat across from her. I could tell she was feeling it too. I watched her gaze drop, and I saw a look of guilt and sorrow flash across her face. "Cole," she whispered, "thank you for meeting me. I don't even know where to start. I'm so sorry. Can I ask you a few questions? If you tell me the truth, it'll ruin everything. Let's just get away and have some time to think. Maybe we can reconnect and find our way back." "Jennifer," I interrupted, shaking my head. "If you can't answer my questions, I'll walk away right now." She visibly fought her emotions, but after a pause she— "Cole, you can ask me anything. Do you know what time I got home last night?" I asked. She hesitated, trying to hide her guilt. "No, not exactly. It had to be after our bedroom," and she closed her eyes, her face showing pain. "Yes, Cole, I know. I know what you must have seen. It's the worst thing you've ever seen. I'm sure of it. And it's all my fault." "Next question, Jennifer," I said, my tone sharp. "How many men have there been? Since we got married, I don't want to know if you're lying. If I think you're lying, I'll leave." Jennifer swallowed, fighting the urge to lie, but in the end she spoke softly. "3, Cole. 3 men who I regret ever meeting." Her confession felt like a punch to the gut. She looked at me, her eyes filled with sorrow. "I know it's over for us, but you deserve better. I'm willing to do anything for another chance. I love you, Cole. Call the lawyer tomorrow. You'll be served with divorce papers." I stood up, letting the weight of those words settle over us. She sat there stunned. I left. I saw her start to cry outside. Memories of our first meeting flooded back. This cafe had once been our place. Now it was the last place I'd ever want to be. The scene in our bed. Her confessions. I knew I'd never get over it. Our marriage was over. Sitting in that damn gold. It was getting dark. I finally let myself cry, knowing it was really over. Later, I remembered Karen Lee's words from that morning about not looking at the photos. I decided to call her. I dialed her number. "Hello, Karen. It's Cole. Johnson just wanted to check in and see how you're doing, as well as what to do with the car. Thanks for calling, Cole. I'm managing, and I'm keeping the car for now. James is in enough trouble that he won't be needing it anytime soon." "What happened?" I asked, a mix of surprise and curiosity in my voice. My tone was firm. "He tried to break into our house and ended up taking a swing at a cop," she replied, her voice hinting at satisfaction. "They had to use a stun gun on him, then he was taken to jail. Something else happened. He wouldn't talk about it, but I think he got into a fight with another inmate. He tried to speak to him, but he refused, so he had to call his brother for bail. Now the whole family knows what he's done. Karen, I don't feel sorry for James, but I do feel sorry for you. You know, I think you made the right call not to look at the pictures." "Pictures, thanks, Cole," she replied. "James came back a few hours ago, begging me to let him stay. I agreed for now, for the kid's sake, but things won't be easy for him. Even his brother, a lawyer, told me to draw up a prenuptial agreement and offered to help me with the finances. He'll be under a lot of pressure from now on. Stay strong, Karen," I said, wishing her well. "When you're ready for the car back, just call me." We ended the call and I sat there for a few moments feeling a pain of something close to envy for Karen. Maybe James had learned his lesson. I thought that being arrested, charged with assaulting a police officer and spending a rough night in jail might have been enough to make him change his ways. I could only hope that for Karen's sake and for their children's that he had finally done so. I drove back to the motel where I was staying, feeling the weight of everything I'd been through there. I had one last thing to do before getting some sleep: call my daughters, Tracy and Sadie. They were twins, not identical but close enough that they sounded alike and could easily fool anyone over the phone. They were studying nursing at a private college, which was a financial strain I hadn't thought twice about managing before the recent deal. At least they didn't look exactly alike, so they couldn't pull off any twin pranks that would have had them teaming up against me even more often. If they'd been identical, it would have been twice as hard to resist. When they begged for something, whether it was for a car, a night out, or money for a spring break trip to Florida, I'd say a cheerful voice on the line, "It's me, your dad. What can I do to help?" I guessed it was always a 50, there's only a 50% chance of getting it right, but she confirmed in a second. "Tracy, here's what I want to do. I'd like to take you and your sister out for breakfast or brunch tomorrow." "What do you say?" "At that bistro on 4th Street we used to go to." "That sounds perfect for me." There was a bit of background noise as she checked with her sister, and then she came back. I could hear a hint of mischief in her voice. I knew she remembered how the last time we'd gone out, they'd invited a whole crew of friends, turning our brunch into a small social event. Not this time. Tracy interrupted her as she started to say something else. "Let's just talk more tomorrow." "All right, I have to go, but I'll see you at 11. Love you, and tell Stevie I love her too." "Bye." "Love you too, Dad." "Can't wait," she replied, hanging up. I just hoped she wouldn't call Jennifer and give her a heads up. I knew if I'd asked her not to, it'd be the first thing she'd do after I left the cafe that night. I hoped my words had made Jennifer realize what she'd done. Her tears had been. She was unstoppable as she realized that the life she'd always known was crumbling. Everything she'd ever cared about, our marriage, our family, the home we'd built together, had unraveled in her hands. There was no going back. She'd have to face telling our daughters, our parents, our friends. I couldn't even begin to imagine how she'd come to terms with it. I had no doubt she'd lose. The house, too. The thought of Jennifer alone in the home we'd shared, probably with the memory of James still imprinted on the sheets, almost tore me apart again. I could still see her crying as I left her. The waitress eventually came over and asked if she needed to go to the ladies' room. Jennifer had managed to refuse politely. She paid the bill and went back home. She found an old bottle of gin in the cupboard. There wasn't enough to make her pass out, but more than enough to keep her thoughts spinning in the worst possible direction. She drank it all and eventually passed out on the couch. Her mind grasped at the slimmest chance that I'd come back the next morning at 11. I was already sitting in the bistro, drinking coffee, when Tracy and Sadie walked in. I'd already approved the draft divorce petition that morning and then driven the 2 hours from Richmond trying to figure out the best way to break the news to my girls. They came in happy and lively, and everything started normally. Hugs, kisses, a round of questions about school and work. We ordered, chatted, and enjoyed our meal. Once our plates were cleared, we started the real conversation. "Dad, we know something's wrong." Sadie started watching me closely. "You look a bit not yourself. Are you here to tell us you have cancer or something?" Her eyes held a mix of worry and humor. "If it's that serious, where's Mom?" I took a deep breath. "Girls, I do have some tough news, but no one's dying. It's about your mom." Tracy's eyes widened. She widened her eyes and interrupted me. Had she done something terrible, like run off with some young lawyer from her firm? She asked, joking nervously. The two of them burst into laughter, amused by the absurdity of the idea until they noticed I wasn't laughing. Their expression sobered. "Dad, no, not Mom. She didn't." I nodded, trying to keep my voice steady. "Girls, listen." "Yes." "So, it seems my wife did something she shouldn't have. But remember, that doesn't mean she's cheating on you. This is between me and her. Dad, if what she did is tearing our family apart, then yes, she's cheating on us too. Dad, let's get out of here. There's a park a few blocks away where we'll have more privacy." People were beginning to stare, so I quickly paid the bill and we walked to the park, each of us holding on to one of my arms. Once we found a bench, we all sat together. Tracy gave me a determined look, her jaw set. "Dad, we deserve to know how bad it really is," she said. "You're right. We're adults now, so we can handle this." I nodded, taking a steadying breath. "All right, girls, on the drive here, I was trying to figure out how to tell you. And yes, you're both adults here. It is. Then your mother cheated on me. I found her at home in our bed with another man. She later admitted there were others too. It's all still sinking in, but I know one thing, she and I can't recover from this. I've already talked to AI. Got the divorce papers today. They were pretty shocked at first, but they were processing the news in their own way. I let them take it all in, knowing there were no more words needed after a while. I broke the silence and said, listen, no matter how bad things are, I need you both to focus on yourselves, keep your heads up, and concentrate on school. I've got enough set aside to cover your senior year, and if either of you wants to go to graduate school, I'll make it happen, but I have one condition. If either of you wants to go to graduate school, I'll make it happen, but I have one condition. They looked at me, waiting, with curiosity. I'm more than willing to support you, but I expect you both to work hard and keep your grades up. I know what happened makes it tough, but you said you're adults now. Well, real adults handle adversity right. They nodded, still looking at me, but they said yes. You're the best, Daddy. We won't let you down, STI promised, while Tracy looked thoughtful. You're right. We won't let you down. But what about you? Are you going to be okay? I took a deep breath, feeling a new sense of purpose. You know, I've thought about it. I've spent my whole life taking care of other people. It started with my grandparents, then my sisters, then your mother, and now you too. I've loved every minute of it, but now the company's sold, and I'm free of all that responsibility. Jennifer, she's gone, but I'll always be here for you both. This is my chance to finally take care of myself. This is my chance to finally take care of myself. I could see that my dad was relieved, giving my hand a squeeze. If you mean that, Dad, then that's amazing, said Tracy, though she looked more skeptical. Are you going to start working for another pharmaceutical company or buy a farm somewhere? She asked. Good question, I replied, smiling. I don't have all the details yet, but I do know that this new life will be active. I'm talking about running marathons, climbing mountains, swimming the Atlantic, maybe even a safari. I want to get out there and live. Who knows, maybe I'll meet someone who wants the same. They both looked at me, stunned as though, did you really come up with all this while driving here from Richmond? Tracy asked, shaking her head in amazement. Yes, mostly, I admitted, feeling a bit lighter. I could sit around drinking and feeling sorry for myself, or I could make the best of this, and I intend to do just that. We hugged, laughed a little more, and eventually said our goodbyes. The drive back to Richmond felt different. I felt like I was leaving something behind, with my daughter's love and support firmly on my side. As soon as I left, they called Jennifer STI. They put her on speaker. Mom, this is STI. Tracy, we just had brunch with Dad. And he told us everything. Is it true that he said I cheated and that he's filing for divorce? Sadie said, her voice was steady but laced with pain. He didn't hold back. Jennifer's breath caught. Oh, girls, it's complicated. Yes, I made a mistake. A terrible one, but we can work through it. If your father just needs some time, Tracy interrupted her, tone hardening. Mom, Dad isn't talking about working things out. He told us he's met with a lawyer. There's no going back. A heavy silence hung between them before Jennifer finally whispered, I know. I ruined things. I just wanted to do anything to make it right, Tracy said, her voice softening. We're not taking sides, but you need to accept reality. Dad's moving on. Jennifer's breathing turned ragged, and they could almost see her holding back tears. I know I ruined everything, she whispered. I think your father hates me, and he has every right to. I'll hire a. I'm sorry you're caught in the middle of all this. I'm so sorry. I'm sure we'll be okay. Dad's doing everything he can to support us. Take care of yourself and remember we're here if you need us. Thank you. They ended the call, sitting in silence, unsure of what to do next. It's kind of funny, isn't it? Sty remarked. We're more worried about Mom, the one who caused all this, than we are about Dad. They shared a sad laugh before deciding to let their parents sort things out on their own. Meanwhile, Jennifer sat in our home. After her phone call with the girls, Jennifer felt like the weight of the world had crushed her. She was feeling hollow. Just as she was considering reaching for more, the doorbell rang. She opened it to find a young woman chewing gum and holding a folder. "Can I help you?" Jennifer asked, her voice trembling. "Yes, ma'am. Are you Jennifer Johnson, wife of Cole Johnson?" "Yes, that's me." "Why did the woman hand her the folder?" She snapped a quick photo and walked back to her car, leaving Jennifer stunned. Jennifer closed the door slowly, sinking back into her chair at the kitchen table. She opened the folder. She could almost hear her last words to him. "Get a lawyer." 6 years later, Jennifer was sitting in a grand ballroom, watching Tracy dance with her new husband. She was thinking about the past, when life had seemed hectic. There had been too many activities, too many demands from the girls, and the constant weight of responsibilities. It had been overwhelming, but she missed it. She still worked at the law firm, dealing with mundane paperwork that felt like punishment. "Here's your wine, Jennifer," her date Leo said. Leo was a kind middle-aged lawyer. The lawyer was a middle-aged guy, nice enough, with a bit of a belly and a receding hairline. He was here as her date, which she thought was a pretty solid choice. But he wasn't me. She looked across the room and saw me, fresh from a mountaineering trip in India. I looked tan, fit, and more at peace than she'd ever remembered. I was with St and her boyfriend, holding hands with a woman. I was as fit and vibrant as she was, and I was radiating the same vitality she'd seen in me recently. Sadie had told her I'd met her on a mountaineering trip and that we'd been traveling together, living life to the fullest. Leo nudged her and said gently, "Let her go. You've done your duty as mother of the bride, but staying here pining over your ex isn't going to help anyone." "Thank you, Leo, but I don't think my husband is doing me or us any favors." "Thank you, Leo," she replied, giving him a sad smile. "You're right. That strange gold Mercedes you drove when you visited us at UNCC." I chuckled, shaking my head. "Sadie, that's a story in itself. Let's just say I borrowed it from a friend and gave it back once I was done with it. I think she sold it afterwards. That car was nothing but bad luck." With that, I turned back to my colleagues, ready to discuss plans for our next adventure.